History is all around us. There are secrets of our past around every corner, hidden in our street names, buried under our feet. And in this series, I'm going to be uncovering these secrets by exploring Britain's most historic towns. This is the original Roman. And I want to discover which towns across the UK can claim to reveal the most about each period in British history. It is terrifying. I'll be deciphering clues in familiar landscapes, bringing lost landmarks back to life, and peeling away the layers to reveal a unique view of these towns in all their former glory. Oh, look at this, look at this. From the Vikings to the Victorians, the Romans to the Tudors, I'll reveal the story of an era through the story of a single town. This week, I'm stepping back to the 16th century, the Tudor period. Beautiful frescoes. This was a glorious era of wealth, art and new horizons, but it was also a troubled era of bloody rebellion and religious strife.
So they'd be chained to the stake, the bundles of wood be lit, and then they would be consumed.
I'm heading to a town that remains steeped in this turbulent time, a town which transformed itself through trade with Europe. Oh, look at that. Oh, this is lovely. And once helped clothe a nation. Now, I have actually kept my knickers on, and that's not quite right, is it? Yes, if you want to understand the Tudor era, then Norwich is the perfect place to be. Today in Norwich, the legacy of the Tudors is everywhere. So I'm here at Carrow Road, the home of Norwich City, who've been known as the Canaries for as long as anyone can remember. But in fact, it was all down to the fans. When the club first started, they wanted a canary on the badge, and you can see him there. But in fact, the canary was emblematic of Norwich going back much earlier than this, going right back to the Tudor period. And that began in 1485, when Henry VII violently seized the throne. It would last almost 120 years through the reigns of Henry VIII, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, until her death in 1603. In this time, England's population almost doubled, and the country grew prosperous. But this was also a time of the Reformation, when there were violent clashes between Catholics and Protestants. And despite its growing prosperity, the country was also riven with struggles between rich and poor over land and rights. Undoubtedly one of the most fascinating and exciting periods in our history. Well, I hope the fans will forgive me for saying it's been a while since their football team has caused that much excitement. But in Tudor times, Norwich was a ferment of cosmopolitan activity, a centre of the textiles industry, a hub of international commerce, and second only to London in terms of population and wealth. When Henry VII came to power, Norwich had already begun its rise to prominence. I'm up here on Mousehold Heath, where you get a fantastic view out over Norwich. But I'm also here to meet Karen Smith, who's not only an expert in medieval literature, but in maps as well. And she's got a very early map to show me, which apparently contains clues about the success and growth of Norwich in the Tudor period. Nice to meet you. So what's so special about this map, Karen?
There are a range of key features about this map. It is the first printed map of any city or town in England.
So of any city?
Of any city or town, the first printed one, so it has a claim to be the first.
Printed in 1558, this groundbreaking map reveals Tudor Norwich's key strategic assets. And according to Karen, if you look closely enough, it tells you who really mattered in Tudor Norwich.
It's an interesting perspective, this map, because most maps go east to west, but actually you're looking east. By doing this perspective, it allows the Wensum River to run very centrally through the middle of the map.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden the river becomes very centrally important in the perspective. And of course, who uses the river in this time? The merchants. The other thing about looking east also is, of course, we're in Norwich, and if you look east from Norwich, you're looking across to the continent rather than to the rest of the country. And there is a great pride in the merchant culture that they're having great trading links and cultural links with the continent at this period. So there might be a little bit of a political message in there as well.
This map has given me the first clue to understanding how society was changing in the Tudor era. The merchant classes were becoming increasingly powerful, and the source of their wealth was surprisingly humble. It was all down to sheep, or more precisely, their wool. Norwich was the town that wool built. This is Elm Hill, which is famous as one of Britain's most historic streets, and actually it does have the distinction of being Britain's most Tudor street. Elm Hill epitomises Tudor Norwich, but this beautiful street, so admired by visitors today, was forged in a terrible catastrophe, a massive fire in 1507 which destroyed almost half of the buildings in Norwich. Across the city, buildings went up in flames, the homes of rich and poor alike, and in this street, every single house but one was burnt to the ground, and the one that was left, the home of a notable wool merchant, was right at the top of Elm Hill. After the blaze, the city fathers wanted to ensure that such a tragedy would never happen again. What had been thatched houses are rebuilt with slate roofs and an architectural innovation, chimneys, to reduce fire risk. Quays at the back of the houses allow easy access to the River Wensum, the main artery of Norwich's trading economy, linking the city to the North Sea and beyond. Elm Hill was at the heart of the city's thriving economy. From their new quayside homes, the city's merchants traded directly with Europe. Their wealth depended on these continental connections. I'm working with aerial archaeologist Ben Robinson. He's got the perfect view up there of how Norwich's trading network stretched over land and sea.
We're just over 1,000 feet above Norfolk, and already I can see the sea right in front of us and the great port of Great Yarmouth. And Norwich just over there. They're so close to one another and connected by the rivers flowing through this flat landscape. It was through here that all the trade took place. We're actually closer to the coast of Netherlands than we are to the other side of London. Everything faced east. All our important trading links were with northwest Europe.
Norwich wasn't just making cloth, it was driving fashion. And amazingly, the people of Tudor England once looked to Norwich, not Paris, for what to wear. To find out more, I've arranged to meet Tudor tailor Nina Mikhaila. But before I can dress up, I need to dress down. Nina, I've got the smock on.
Great.
Now, I have actually kept my knickers on, and that's not quite right, is it?
No, we actually don't have really any evidence at all, certainly for working women in the 16th century. They're just surplus to requirement, really.
I'm not entirely sure that pants are surplus to requirement, but we'll see. So, Tudor women didn't wear pants, but they did have a kirtle, a woolen dress which once would have been a common sight on the streets of the nation.
What I need to ask you to do is just reach in and just lift your bust up.
Okay.
So that it's in the proper position.
Right, I'm going to turn away from this. That's immediately much more comfortable.
Yes.
Now it's behaving like a support bra. It's very warm as well.
It's like wearing a blanket, really, isn't it?
Yeah. But you really needed to like the colour. In fact, it was the law. The colours are quite restricted then. You can't really do something different.
There's two things. There are very strong conventions and there are also actual sumptuary laws and royal proclamations about what you're allowed to wear, depending on what level of society you live in. It's about knowing your place in the world, and that's a very important part of Tudor society.
Yeah, I quite like it.
I think it's nice.
It's a bit girl with a pearl earring. Only the upper classes were allowed to wear colours like gold and purple. But red was frequently worn by ordinary working women in Tudor England. And not just any red. Tudor Norwich wasn't only famed for its textiles, but for dyeing as well. And it was this colour, madder red, that became symbolic of the city. But in fact, you'd see it everywhere in Tudor England. Madder is a plant, and people have used its roots to make dyes for thousands of years. In Norwich, the plant was bought and sold in the town's markets, and it's still used by local artists and dyers today. Oh, it looks like we must be close to the home of a textile artist, Aviva.
Hi, hello.
Aviva Lee is a designer and teacher who's experimented with making madder red the traditional Tudor way. She's offered to teach me how to create this most Tudor of colours.
You can see the red. Traditionally, they would strip off all the outside bark and just use the centre of the root to get the really good quality red.
So what do you have to do to it to extract that pigment out of it?
First soaking it in water and then cooking out the colour.
After preparing the wool, Aviva tells me to mix the madder pigment with alum, a type of aluminium sulphate, and water, just as a Tudor artisan would have done.
And then we're going to let it simmer very, very slowly, maximum about 70 degrees, to extract the colour, and that needs to cook for about an hour.
Aviva has recreated the Tudor processes by trial and error, but the precise recipes remain secret.
Recipes don't really survive, unfortunately, because dyeing is a bit like alchemy. Success depended on them having good, strong colours, and they wouldn't necessarily share their recipes with other people.
But there was one ingredient which we know the textile workers just couldn't get enough of, one which flowed freely through Tudor Norwich. And it is human urine.
It is.
Yeah.
It is, and it contains ammonia, and the ammonia, again, will bring the pH up a little bit and just helps to brighten the colour.
They must have needed a lot of it, though.
Yep. We had, I think, 365 pubs in this town, so they used to have a pot outside every pub where you'd have somebody going around collecting it.
It's estimated that 200,000 litres of human urine was needed every year to keep the Tudor textile industry afloat. Aviva doesn't use urine for dyeing her textiles today, but to achieve that authentic Tudor feel, she's made an exception for me. I'm persuading myself I can detect a distinct aroma there, but I don't think I can. The alchemy is working, and we're starting to see that stunning orangey red hue, once the dominant colour in the streets of Norwich and the rest of Tudor England.
In a muddy world, I think a little bit of madder red would have cheered everybody up, definitely.
I'm in Norwich, the perfect place to understand the Tudor world. In the early 16th century, England was a Catholic country, and the church was rich and powerful, and left its mark on our towns, especially on Norwich, which today has the greatest number of medieval churches anywhere in Northern Europe. From the sky, aerial archaeologist Ben Robinson can see just how all these churches are woven into the city's fabric.
They're dotted all over the place. There seem to be dozens of them. And there was an old saying, a church for every week of the year and a pub for every day of the year. Well, I can't comment on that bit, of course, but the number of churches tells us something about the size of the population, the density of the population. They all had congregations. They all served little parishes.
But the religious life of the people of England was about to undergo a profound change. Enter Henry VIII, a young king with big ideas and an intense and deadly desire for his mistress, Anne Boleyn. Henry wanted to marry Anne, but to do that he needed an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, something the Pope would not permit. Undeterred, the king came up with a radical solution. And in 1533, Henry VIII made the decision to split with Rome and set up an independent church with himself at its head. He was kick-starting the English Reformation. Protestantism, already spreading across Europe, would go on to become the new Tudor creed. All over England, Henry seized or disbanded over 800 religious and charitable institutions, including nearly 80 in Norfolk alone. In Norwich Cathedral, you can see visible evidence of how worshippers would have seen the eclipse of Catholicism from their pews. Oh, this is fantastic. Beautiful frescoes. Now, these are medieval. These are pre-Reformation. They would have been completely covered up, whitewashed over, erased from memory. It's quite astonishing to think how different people's experience of coming to church would have been after the Reformation. The church itself was transformed. And what we're looking at are illustrations, of course. These are the characters and the stories from the Bible. They're quite important, really, to people's understanding of their faith. And then that's all gone. The passage of time has revealed these forgotten frescoes again. They're a poignant reminder of what a culture shock the Tudor Reformation must have been. Muriel McClendon is an American scholar who has studied court documents to find out how the Reformation played out in Norwich. Muriel, you've mined the records here in Norwich. What does that tell you about the Reformation here?
Well, there was some conflict in Norwich as people's religious ideologies changed. There were people who took it upon themselves to go and throw stones through glass windows. I think there were some iconoclasm, people hacking away at statues. But I don't think that there was any sort of wholesale tearing down of buildings. You can find references to people coming into the mayor's court complaining about a man. He was calling St. Peter a knave. And I think the mayor's court essentially told everybody to just go home.
It suggests that there was, in some cases at least, a tolerant attitude to dissent. Muriel also believes there's evidence of pragmatism in the way the monks at the cathedral adjusted to the new religious reality.
Very few clergy went so far in their opposition to any of the religious regimes that they were ejected from their livings.
So the monks associated with the cathedral here, they had the option of staying on. They had the option of adopting this.
And they did, yeah.
So the monks became the clergy?
Yes, the dean and chapter of the new foundation.
But actually, the transition from Catholicism to Protestantism would be far from smooth. After Henry VIII died in 1547, power swung between Protestants under his son Edward, and then Catholics when Edward's half-sister Mary took the throne. By the end of the reign of Elizabeth I, England was established as a Protestant nation. Throughout this turbulent period, ordinary people often had to choose between their faith or persecution. I've come to the Lollards Pit pub to find out how bad it got in Tudor Norwich. I'm hoping Professor Alexandra Walsham of Cambridge University will be able to tell me more. Alex.
Yes, hello.
Hello. And she appears to have brought along a very, very big book. That is huge. I hadn't expected it to be quite so massive.
Well, it grew over time. It was first published in 1563 and then systematically increased in size as people sent in more information.
So can we open it?
Absolutely.
This is the Book of Martyrs, once a common sight in Protestant churches across Tudor England. It records the martyrdom of hundreds of Christians throughout time.
So here's one of the martyrs who was burnt in Norwich, Thomas Bilney, who was an extremely early victim of the religious turmoil.
And how was he put to death?
He's burnt at the stake. Fire is symbolic of the punishment that heretics would suffer in hell. So they'd be chained to the stake, the bundles of wood be lit, and then they would be consumed.
Such a horrific way to end someone's life, isn't it? Thomas Bilney was burned to death in 1531 in the lead-up to Henry's Reformation. At that time, he was just one of a handful of martyrs in Norwich. But according to this book, under the reign of Henry's Catholic daughter Mary, the executions increased. So this is Bilney. Who else have we got that's relevant to Norwich?
Another key figure in the kind of Norwich Reformation is a woman called Cecily Ormes. And she, in fact, is inspired by witnessing the death of other martyrs. And standing in the audience there, she declares provocatively that she supports their cause. And somebody else in the audience hears what she says and turns her in.
Mary reigned for just 5 years. During that time, several citizens of Norwich were burnt to death, some on the very spot where this pub now stands. So these were public events?
They were public events, and here at Lollards Pit, it was chosen as a kind of a setting in which it was possible for people to actually sit down and watch the burning.
How horrific. You know, to modern sensibilities, it's quite extraordinary to think that people's faith was that strong that it would drive them to give up their lives. And, you know, I think we tend to think about that in the context of terrorism today and people who are willing to sacrifice themselves and also other people to a particular faith, a particular cause.
For people at this time, they believe there is only one route to salvation, and therefore, if you adhere to a false religion, you're going to be damned, you're going to end up in hell.
For some, it could actually have been an easy choice to adopt the new religion. They were unhappy with the way the church was run and with some of the beliefs and practices that had become enshrined in it. But for others, it would have challenged deep-rooted beliefs that they just couldn't renounce. And for others, again, I'm sure it was a pragmatic decision, that it was simply the easiest and the safest thing to do to make the switch. But that flip-flopping from Catholic to Protestant, back to Catholic, and then to Protestant again, that certainly took its toll. Back in the 16th century, Lollards Pit is a small, natural amphitheatre. Crowds have gathered on the slopes to watch. A martyr is chained to a stake and the kindling at their feet lit. Death is drawn out and agonising. Faith in the Tudor era is dangerously fluid. It's a terrible time to be absolutely certain in your religious beliefs. I'm in Norwich, a city packed with hints about what life was like in Tudor times. In 1547, Henry VIII had been succeeded by his 9-year-old son Edward, and England was in turmoil. Wealthy landowners seeking to capitalise on the thriving wool industry seized land on which to graze their sheep. The enclosure of what had previously been common land meant the rural poor had nowhere to graze their own livestock. The peasants were up in arms, and Norwich would once again be at the heart of the action. In the summer of 1549, things had reached a tipping point. The peasants were fed up with their land being taken away and enclosed. They were ripping up fences, and they had found a leader. 16,000 rebels rallied behind one man, Robert Kett. The rebels gathered on Mousehold Heath. The torches and fires of thousands of angry men would have lit up the night sky. I've come here to meet Andy Wood, who has studied the rebellion and its causes. Andy, tell me about Kett. Who was he?
Well, Robert Kett was one of those men who'd done well out of the economic and social changes that are pulling English society apart in the mid-16th century. Population's rising, common land is being enclosed, poorer people are being pushed to the margins of survivability. And the rebellion that Robert leads in 1549 is partially designed to turn the clock back on economic changes that he himself is benefiting from.
Despite benefiting from these changes, Kett felt huge sympathy for the poor and he was an effective leader. Within 4 days of the rebellion breaking out, his huge army had reached Norwich. Today, no one knows for sure what Kett's camp would have looked like, but from the few sources that survive, we can recreate the main features on the heath. There's an abandoned chapel where Kett has his headquarters. A former stately home where he holds his political prisoners. And a huge tree, the Oak of Reformation, under which members of his council meet. This isn't just a camp, this is an alternative seat of power. For a few brief weeks, there are more people on this hill than there are in Norwich itself. And from here, Kett sends a radical list of demands to the Tudor authorities.
The best known of those rebel demands is the phrase, "We pray that all bondmen should be made free, for God made all free with his precious blood shedding." And that's a reference to the reimposition of serfdom on Norfolk estates. So you're bonded to the land, you can't move off the land without your lord's permission. You can't marry without your lord's permission. You can't educate your children without your lord's permission.
Kett's demands were rejected. His choice now was either to disperse his men or press on and try to take Norwich.
We fought 3 battles in Norwich, 2 of which the rebels won.
Yeah.
The first in late July, when we seized control of the city, and then 2 others against royal armies which are sent up to defeat the rebels.
That's astonishing. That, you know, he's turned up with this peasant army and wins 2 battles. Although Kett had taken Norwich, holding it was a different matter. Rebels and government troops faced each other at Dussindale, outside the city gates. And archaeologists have uncovered physical evidence from that day.
What we've got here are some musket balls which were excavated on the field of Dussindale, and you can see that some of them are impacted.
Yeah.
So that you can imagine these impacting against the armour of the rebel soldiers.
3,000 rebels were killed. Robert Kett himself was captured and sentenced to death.
Robert Kett is hanged in chains from the walls of Norwich Castle, which is a horrible death that would have taken hours of excruciating torment.
So do you know how long his corpse was left hanging there then?
Yeah, he was up there for 3 years, and at which point bits of it...
3 years? Andy believes this was no accident. Tudor justice was brutal and exemplary, and the authorities wanted to make a point to the citizens of Norwich.
Martial law is declared, and it's clear that hundreds of people are being led away to be executed. So the bloodbath that follows is clearly intended to imprint a memory of the rebel defeat on the minds of the labouring people of Norfolk for generations afterwards.
Protests against enclosure took place throughout southern Britain, but Kett's rebellion seems like the most dramatic and significant challenge to royal authority. I think it really mattered because Norwich really mattered. How could the king possibly let the second biggest city in the country fall into rebel hands? At the same time, ordinary people here clearly felt a very deep resentment about how hard their lives were. And it wasn't just space for their livestock that was threatened, it was their own living space too.
You can see the natural constraints here of the river, but everyone wanted to be in the centre. Everyone wanted to be where the action was. But you could also see how densely packed that space is, how everything's jostling and competing for position. The houses, the businesses, the monastic precincts, everything's sort of crammed in there. Up here you can sort of think yourself back into the Tudor period and think, actually, it would have been pretty crowded down there. It would have been pretty unpleasant at times.
And when the lucrative Tudor wool trade hit a downturn, the solution involved making Norwich even more crowded. The merchants of Norwich had a cunning plan to revive the flagging textile industry. They effectively headhunted textile experts from Flanders to come over and live and work in Norwich. And they sent out an official invitation signed by Elizabeth I, no less, inviting 30 merchants and their households to come over. And this, of course, is how they would have arrived in Norwich. These merchants were known as the Strangers. Historian and archivist Kathy Terry can explain why they were so keen to move to Norfolk.
The Strangers were just ordinary people like you and me, but they were refugees. They came from the Low Countries, what's present-day southern Holland, northern France and Belgium, and they came here to escape persecution, have a peaceful life, and help our economy as well.
So why were they being persecuted over on the continent?
Well, in the 16th century, there were a lot of trouble between Catholics and Protestants. Protestants weren't tolerated at that point.
The Reformation played out right across Europe. Countries were torn apart by religious wars between Catholics and Protestants. Not for the last time, a British city would benefit from the skills of European immigrants. So what's in the box?
Obviously, it's very, very rare for textiles from that period to survive. What we've got is something just a little bit later, but it's very much an example of one of the many techniques that the Strangers brought to Norwich.
Pop those on. Oh, look at that. Oh, this is lovely. So this is the coat of arms of Norwich. So that looks quite English, but around the outside here, that pattern looks quite exotic.
It does, well spotted, because that betrays its origin as the technique came from Persia or Turkey. Then the Strangers got hold of the technology to make that same product, and then they brought it to England. So this is called now, and it's in Norwich, Norwich Turkey work. And it became a huge industry.
Was there ever an element of coming over here, taking our jobs?
My take on it is, if you were doing all right, you probably didn't notice the effect of direct labour competition. If you were, you know, maybe less well educated, maybe had fewer career opportunities within the weaving trade, you might be a bit resentful. But by and large, it was a growing industry, so there was something for everyone.
Yeah. As well as bringing their skills to help rebuild Norwich's wool trade, I've heard the immigrants brought something else with them. Now, I know there's a connection between the Strangers and Canaries, but what is it?
If you imagine you're a weaver, you're working dawn till dusk, the male canary sees the loom or the clack of the loom as competition and will sing. Strangers that brought over this tradition, but it was quickly popularised with local people, so much so that the breeding of the Norwich canary became quite a big thing here.
So they are the Tudor radio?
They are.
By the late 16th century, there were 6,000 Strangers in Norwich. They made up around a third of the population. And there must be descendants of the original Strangers still here in Norwich today.
I'm one. My family came over in the 1620s or 30s from northern France. But really? I'm very typical. If you go back to most people who've got a good Norwich stock, you will find a stranger in there.
Starting their new lives in Norwich, putting down roots here, the Strangers didn't forget their families and friends in the Low Countries. Kathy has collected copies of the few letters that survive, fragments of a community now straddling two worlds. And this one is really, really poignant. A man writing to his wife. And he says, "You'd never believe how friendly the community is here and how well disposed the English are to our nation. If you came here with only half your possessions, you'd never think of going back. Don't hesitate. Send my money and the 3 children." He's desperate for his wife to come over here and join him. They've found a safe haven. He wants her to be with him. And I think you read these letters and it gives you that connection back to families that were torn apart by the religious persecution that was going on at the time. And you can't help thinking of all the contemporary cases where this still goes on. I'm in Norwich, quite possibly the best place to come if you want to understand our country in the Tudor era. In the 16th century, Norwich had grown rich thanks to its wool trade, but nearly half the population was classified as poor. The Reformation deprived the poor of the crucial safety net once provided by religious institutions, and many fell into debt, homelessness, and crime. Attempts were being made to tackle the problem, or at least deal with its fallout, and Norwich was one of the first towns to try a new approach. Colin Towie and Dave Hong are local historians. Hello, which one's Dave?
I'm Dave.
Hi, Dave.
Nice to meet you,
Hello,
Alice.
nice to meet you, Colin.
And I'm Colin.
Nice to meet you
Nice
too.
to meet you.
I wanted to talk to you about Tudor crime and punishment and specifically what happened at the House of Correction.
Basically, it's something that's instituted in the mid-Tudor period in the 1560s, and it's quite a new idea in terms of kind of penal reform and punishment because the clue is in correction.
Yeah.
Normally, before this period, people are incarcerated, they're held until the trial, and then they're punished. Whereas this is about setting them to work generally in order to improve their behaviour in one way or another, their moral character. What was happening in Norwich in the 1570s and 80s was like an experiment, a social experiment. There were lots of these going on in places like London, Sandwich, Ipswich, all over the country.
Yeah.
And it was really what became, in Norwich in particular, the template for the later Elizabethan poor laws, which went on to be the poor laws into the 18th and 19th century.
For women in the Tudor era, the law was particularly harsh and humiliating.
There's lots of descriptions of young women at the time being described as working at their own hands.
What does that mean?
Well, it means they're away from the traditional controls of father, husband, master. And this is a big issue because, of course, that has a knock-on effect that these young women fall prey to men who lure them into their houses of ill repute. And, of course, these then young women, a lot of them end up having children out of wedlock.
And if one of these women dared to be outspoken in public,
They tended to be ducked in the river.
so it's all about humiliation.
So it is all about humiliation. I think
Yeah.
we're going to humiliate you this
Yeah,
day.
we'd like to give you a real experience of that, Alice, if you'll come with
I
us.
thought this was going to happen.
The river's just down here.
It is just down there, isn't
Yeah.
it?
That's right.
Brilliant.
So the emphasis now is on shaming you. So the first thing we have to do, we have to mark you for your crime. Whether you were in the stocks or whether you went to the ducking stool, you'd have to wear a paper which detailed the crime. So we've
Right.
got that here for now. There we go, a paper.
Okay, so I'm a scold and other offences. Okay, so I feel pretty humiliated already.
So, but remember, you wouldn't just be walking, you'd be on the back of a cart, you'd be up high, and not only that, you'd have some rough music marking you out as well, and we
are prepared.
We have.
Oh. Dave and Colin have found an actual case involving one Alice Cocker, who was convicted of being a scold, a public nuisance. They very kindly offered to give me a taste of her fate.
Clear the way.
Oh my goodness, that looks pretty authentic.
Make way for a scold!
Dave and Colin, I'm not sure I deserve this. I don't think anyone deserves this.
Prepare to duck a scold!
Oh my God!
Scold!
Ah! Oh, it's so cold. Ah! Ah! Into the stinking winsome I go. Oh! I feel well and truly publicly humiliated. It's quite a horrendous thing to do to somebody. I think that, yeah, it is all about ritual humiliation. It's all about parading somebody through the streets of the town, making sure everybody knows what they've done, and then offering them up to the river. That chair is a reminder that this was a tough and unforgiving time for women. And that's important to remember because so much of our image of the Tudor period is of a glorious and enlightened era, particularly in the arts.
This shoe is my father.
This, after all, was the century of Holbein, Marlowe and Shakespeare. But there was a less well-known genius, and I'm on my way to find out a bit more about him. Oh, I'm approaching this with a bit of dread and trepidation because I can hear Morris dancers in there. I'm going to have to face my fears as this courtyard is not only playing host to Morris dancers, comedian Tim Fitzhyam is also here. Tim.
Hey, hello. How are you?
Hello.
Oh, nice to see you.
Nice to see you too.
Welcome to Norwich. It's exciting.
This is crazy.
Yep.
This is utterly bizarre.
Yep.
But Morris dancing goes all the way back to the Tudor time.
Definitely, and probably further.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't really know where Morris dancing's from, but some people think it's Moorish, came up from Africa with the Moorish people.
Yeah.
Some people think it's from the old Anglo-Saxon word, which means either... It's had two meanings. It meant either flamboyant or violent.
Or
and
both.
the Saxons, or both.
Tim has studied the exploits of a man called William Kemp. He was an actor who often starred as the fool in Shakespeare's plays and had ideas of his own about what made good comedy. But despite his close collaboration with the bard, Kemp has been largely forgotten.
Kemp and Will Shakespeare really fell out. They had
Yeah.
a massive argument about a comedy part in Hamlet.
In Hamlet?
Yeah.
I mean, come on.
Shakespeare was like, I think Hamlet's going to be quite depressing.
I don't think it works.
It might depress A-level students for the next 400 years. And Kemp literally said, I will show you the true nature of comedy.
Yeah.
And he walked out of Shakespeare's office and Morris danced from London to Norwich.
Really?
In 9 days.
Kemp hoped that this would be the pinnacle of his career. A hilarious Morris dancing odyssey between Tudor England's two biggest cities, London and Norwich. What a mad thing to do.
We think it's mad, but Kemp thought it was going to be a spectacle. He thought it was going to entertain people in a much bigger way than he could do just on the stage. I can get out there, I can go into the country, and I can make people laugh all the way to Norwich.
By the time Kemp arrived here, a huge crowd of fanatical Morris dancing enthusiasts had turned up to watch. Norwich had become the site of one of the great comic spectacles of the Tudor age. And was there ever a reconciliation between him and Will Shakespeare?
We don't know what happened to Kemp. We think he went off and worked for a different company for a bit, and there is a death in Southwark of Kemp. It just says Kemp, a man. And that's such a tragic burial record, if that is Will Kemp, you know, who was such a gloriously amazing man, 3 years after the Morris, to have been just remembered as Kemp, a man. Speaking of which, do you want to try a bit of Morris?
Not really.
Would you like to have a go?
No.
It is fun,
No,
honestly.
I really don't want to have a go.
Imagine-
Are you gonna join in with them?
Of course, if you will. Go on. It's great fun.
This isn't fair. OK, so it's not exactly Strictly. But they have this natty waistcoat ready for me. And a lovely set of bells. Kemp danced all the way in his buskins, open-toed lace-up boots. I'm sticking with my closed-toe version, thanks very much. But I'm following in the footsteps of Tudor England's lost comic genius, a man once feted by thousands in these very streets. Thank you. So William Kemp finally reached the centre of Norwich on Saturday, the 8th of March, 1599. Crowds filled the marketplace, there were musicians playing, and Kemp's final flourish was to nail his buskins to the Guildhall door. In the absence of buskins, my bells will have to do. There we go, the ghost of William Kemp. I'm sure it's no accident that Kemp chose Norwich. This most Tudor of public spectacles could only end in this most Tudor of towns. The wool trade, the merchants, strangers, heresy, reformation and rebellion. Tudor Norwich had it all. This is when Norwich's fortune is spun from the wool trade, making it the second biggest town in all of England. The poor who are left behind rebel against rich and powerful landowners. The terrible tug of war between the Catholic and Protestant faiths claims its victims. Norwich is the ideal place to take the temperature of these tumultuous Tudor times. And with so many buildings from the period still standing, from the Guildhall, where Kemp nailed up his buskins after his mad Morris dance, to wonderful Elm Hill, there are many reasons why Norwich is Britain's most Tudor town.